Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Bann. That is hotter than usual. To Coffee with Bann. So today's coffee is Tully's Coffee Hawaiian Blend. And today's topic, mobile phones. Because, I felt like it. So, phones are something that have fascinated me for a long time. Whether it be simple landlines or, cellular cell phones. Like, when I was 8, I often would just sneak onto phones, if I could. I was a mischievous little gremlin. And as I am now substantially older than that, I've just got a box with a bunch of phones in it. And iPod Touches. There's a lot in here. And it shows some of my history with them. But, I think it's better to start with where phones started, which was just this big, honking, brick-sized brick, right? A cell phone, well, okay, so actually, I guess they started with landlines way back in the 1800s kind of thing, but we're talking mobile phones here, so cell phones really started as car phones. A phone you install in your car, which, bad. Very bad. No. Bad driver. But that was kind of the only way that you could get a phone, portably. You had to have it hooked up to the car battery. Or its own separate battery in the car. Oh. Oh, that's a coffee taste. I forgot to taste it at the beginning of this. Oops. Certainly tastes like coffee. I'm not used to just straight coffee tasting coffee. I'm used to flavors. Anyway. Right. The first proper portable phone would have been in the 80s. I don't know exactly when, probably like 86, maybe 87. And it was this huge brick of a phone that was unwieldy. I don't have one to show you because do I look like I'm made of money? But unwieldy and insane, and all you could do was call, because, that's what phones were for. If you wanted to send a written message to somebody, you write it out and send it through the mail. I might not have added enough sugar. Anyway. But yeah, the early days were just big and heavy and not useful for anything other than just making a few phone calls. And incredibly expensive, too. I don't know exactly what it would have set you back. Editor Bann here can show you. I'm sorry. But, it is insanely pricey, or was. Now, eventually phones did get better. We got things, fast forwarding a little bit because I don't know that much about the earliest phones. But fast forward a bit to I don't know, 2000, when was this made? Whatever. Nokia bricks. Or, not brick, candy bars. This kind of thing. And flip phones. I like flip phones. Flip phones are cool. I kind of wish they could come back into style, really. It'd be nice. So, these two were the prevailing kind of styles of phones in the 2000s. And even the late 90s had some of it, but not that much. But these were just little neat kind of things that older ones would have monochrome screens and very basic features. They only had a numpad, so you had to text by pressing, like, let's say you want to say thanks. You press 8 4 4 2 6 6 5 5 7 7 7 7. That's how you get letters through just straight up having a number pad. But they did advance, and they would end up getting more games, more features. Hello, Macbeth. And from what I remember, Nokia was the big player at the time. They had Symbian, their operating system, which was it was certainly something. It ran stuff. It ran Java, if I recall correctly. And it was usable, I suppose. But they weren't the only game. In the late 90s, the first smartphone would have been released. I think it was the late 90s. But the BlackBerry. Which, not the same as the kind of smartphone that you would see today. The BlackBerry was more like this. Had a full keyboard, no matter how tiny it might have been. And had things like an email client. And other things that, that were targeted very much toward business folk. And they would call them Crackberry. Because they could not live without them. That style of phone was the very first phone that I ever got. It was specifically this one, actually. Which, this is in rough condition. I got it when I was 8, and the phone part of it just didn't work. It was broken. Kind of. I was not allowed to call, text, or try to use the internet on it. I tried anyway, got in trouble. But it had a camera, it had a voice recorder, it had calculator and other things like that, and it had a couple of games. A couple of game demos. Had the Brick Breaker thing and Uno, and I loved it to death. When I say to death, I mean I loved it till it died. Not my fault, mind you. It was thrown across the house at some point, not by me. And now it is in a very sad state. But I got a replacement, which doesn't have any of the old stuff on it, and I am sad about that. I miss all my stuff, man. But yeah, that style of phone ended up becoming very prevalent for business-type folk, and people who had a lot of money to spend on a mobile phone. But for the layperson with a regular amount of money to spend, a candy bar phone was going to be your option, generally. Maybe a flip phone, because, you know, those were also pretty in style, and from my understanding, similar in price at the time, if not if not slightly cheaper. I don't know. I've never been that big on the history of older phones. I know that they're cool. I like to collect them. I haven't kept up with how they I haven't kept up with trends of the time necessarily. Something that I do know about is what is what came after the flip phone and what killed the flip phone. The iPhone. This is a definitely broken 3GS that is my grandma's old phone, actually. And it super doesn't work. The iPhone was created as the first, like, modern smartphone. It was the first to popularize having just straight up a glass front that you would tap with a regular touchscreen, a capacitive touchscreen, rather than a resistive one. Resistive touchscreen would be like the kind that you find on a DS, right? Where you have to use a little bit of pressure, and that's why a plastic stylus works on it. A capacitive touchscreen is specifically the kind that requires a finger or a hot dog or something like that. Something that can conduct electricity slightly. But the iPhone was a revolution when it came out. More than the Wii. That was a cheeky, terrible joke. It had the full front touchscreen, right? It had a virtual keyboard rather than even having like a slide-out keyboard like some have, right? Or this would be a better example. It would use a virtual keyboard, and the whole point was you download apps for things, right? Which, actually, no, hold on. The iPhone didn't even have an app store when it released. That didn't come out until about a year after the release of the iPhone. I think the iPhone 3GS was the iPhone 3G, one of the two. A year after the release of the iPhone, we got the App Store. Before that, Steve Jobs wanted everybody to just use web apps, which I can understand the appeal of the idea of web apps, but they also kind of suck, and I hate them. Anyway. But yeah, it was a revolution. And I hate it, honestly. It as cool as it is, and as cool as it was, the original iPhone did have its drawbacks. No App Store initially. You couldn't change the background. Like, your wallpaper was going to be black. And when it first released, you could only get it for $500 and a contract with AT&T. No other phone carrier was even allowed. And Apple tried to protect that. They tried to sue for people using other phone carriers with it via jailbreaking, which was a process of basically letting your iPhone do things that Apple didn't want you to. It's like modding a console, but slightly more necessary. But yeah, Apple tried to make it illegal to do that, and courts said no. Thankfully. But even despite all its shortcomings, it was the template for the modern cell phone. It gave us an actual touch UI that was, decent. Multi-touch, which was huge. And it was great. And terrible, but great. Now, Apple did eventually get a competitor. actually not even too much later, in the operating system from Google, Android, which this is a Galaxy S1. We'll get there, but Android was being created as a phone operating system for things that had keyboards, and then Google bought it because they saw potential in it, which understandable. I would see potential in Android too. And then the iPhone released, and they really quickly had to change it to be a touch-centric thing. Right? I don't have the, what was it, HTC One or HTC Dream or something like that. The original Android phone was HTC. I don't have that to show off, but it is fascinating, and I'd kind of like to get one. But Android was released as the competitor to iOS, at the time known as iPhone OS. And you know what? It was kind of better. At the time, it was kind of a slow, clunky piece of crap. It never worked that well initially. It definitely felt like other regular phones at the time, but it did grow into its own. As early as Android 2, the operating system started to get good. Right, as early as Android 2.0, it was starting to get good and actually competitive. Unfortunately, every company put their own skin on Android. They had their own software, they had their own UI, and most of them sucked. I'm looking at you, Samsung's TouchWiz. I despise TouchWiz. Getting a little off track. No, you know what? No, I'm not. TouchWiz sucks, and it always sucked. And Samsung's current UI is mediocre, but it is a huge step up from TouchWiz. I am a certified TouchWiz hater. It was slow, it was not super intuitive, it looked bad, and I hate it. I hate TouchWiz, I hate everything it stands for. Except for the whole being Android. It's still Android. Just a crappy skin on top of Android, basically. Anyway. But yeah, every company had their own different skin, and most of them were terrible. And getting just straight up regular Android without a skin it wasn't a thing, really. Like, the Android open source project, I think, existed at the time, but it wasn't really usable on its own. You had to get it from a regular vendor of some sort. Fast forward a bit to, like, Android 4. Specifically Android, I want to say 4.4 KitKat, I think was really, well, no, it was the last of the old Android, right? 4.4 was the last point where you kind of had to have a skin of some sort. Android 5 was the first one that you could just, that it was a consistent look and feel for a lot of companies, right? And Android 5 was the start of modern Android. Brought a lot of features that I can't tell you off the top of my head because I don't remember exactly, but I know that it did. I have seen those features in action, and Android 5 was just so much gooder. And iOS kept getting updates too, but nothing really changed with it until iOS 7, when they stopped doing what's the word? I can't, like, design that, that was meant to look more like realistic things and less like abstract concepts. Like with the, Notepad app having lines the way that the Notepad app looking like a notepad rather than just a yellow box with text, right? I cannot remember the word for the life of me. I need to look it up now. This is gonna bug me for the rest of the day. Skeuomorphism. Thank you, Google. And the first result being Wikipedia. iOS 7 was when they moved away from skeuomorphic design and into more flat shapes and abstract concepts for things, right? Which, I mean, I don't like it. I definitely prefer having more good-looking things than just flat. At least we're kind of moving away from that with having a lot of still some detail and actual gradients and things. And like it's getting better. Not fantastic still, but better. But for the most part, iOS has kind of stayed very similar to how it was before. You've gotten new features. In like iPhone OS 3, you would get you got actual background support on iPhones, not iPod Touches. That sucks. I didn't even mention the iPod Touch. Crap. And not that it matters. It was basically just the iPhone without the phone part. It was meant for running apps and the web browser, maybe some emails, but it didn't have cellular service or anything like that. Yeah, iOS 3, you got backgrounds. iOS 7, alongside the new design language, you also got, like, what's it called? Looking it up again. Control Center. iOS 7 brought Control Center, which Android already had at that point, basically. Like, it was combined with the notification bar. But, you know what, still useful. Whether Apple should have added it earlier or not, it's still good that they did eventually. iOS probably 16 or 17 brought widget support, I think. Again, something Android had years earlier, but admittedly, I think widgets are a little bit stupid. Some can be useful, things like having a clock on your home screen, but I don't use widgets. I have the clock on my home screen, and that is it. The rest is apps. One thing iOS never supported was rearranging icons on your home screen however you want. They had to be in a list from top left to bottom right. And that was it. Android solved this problem many years ago, and so did basically every single launcher for Android. Because you could have different home screens for Android, it was great. Whereas iOS, you only had the one. Now, Android also kept getting features. And oftentimes it would get those features before iOS. But they wouldn't always be stable right out of the box. I'm struggling to remember what features were introduced when now. But one big thing that Android always had over iOS was being able to install apps from a file rather than through the App Store. Which, good for Android. Not good that iOS can't do that, but good that Android can. And I think Google's trying to change that, and I don't like that. But, Android's always been able to do that, and I adore that. APK files are fantastic, and I so appreciate them. And it means that you're not stuck with whatever Google decides to approve or Apple decides to approve. It's just better for freedom. Now, one thing that iOS has always had over Android is generally iOS is a little bit more stable. I've had a lot fewer phone destroying crash kind of things. Not phone destroying, but like restart requiring crashes and such. I've had a lot fewer of those on iOS than I have Android. Which Apple, no matter what, you do have to say Apple is good at optimization. As proven by the fact that they made their own chips in order to make everything faster on Mac. You know, I've been talking a lot about iOS versus Android here, but nobody is talking about the real best option. BlackBerry OS, Web OS, Firefox OS, Windows Phone. No, wait, that one is actually what I'm talking about, and it still sucks. Microsoft had Windows as an operating system for many, many years by the time that mobile phones finally started being kind of what they are today, right? And they had a version of Windows meant primarily for mobile devices, but said mobile devices weren't really phones. Do I have one in here? No, it's not in here, darn. Ugh. They were, I want to say it stands for Personal Digital Assistant? PDAs. That's what Windows Mobile was really meant for, was small devices that were meant for productivity and not, like, calling and such. But at some point, they did release Windows Phone, or Windows Mobile 7, or whatever, and it had the Metro design language, which was what was used for Windows 8, and Xbox 360, and Xbox One, and after Windows Phone 7, they started applying Metro to everything, even where it didn't belong. But it worked fairly well for mobile. Too bad Windows Phone still kind of sucked. It was as unreliable as Windows, which is to say, you would still have a lot of the same crashes and such, and it was not great, either compatibility-wise in this case, or, well, okay, no, Windows is not bad compatibility-wise, but, it was not great stability-wise, and Windows Phone also didn't have a lot of compatibility. The Windows Store sucked. There was very little for it, and there was very little convincing devs to use it and upload apps to it and make apps for it. And it just, they dropped the ball with it. Windows Phone was overall a poor choice, I would say. And you can tell that that was the case because they killed it off. They killed off Windows Phone in 2017, and as much as I'd love to have a third competitor in terms of mobile operating systems, a real third competitor, Windows Phone wasn't it. It was destined to die, honestly. But it had a good keyboard, I'll give it that. Of course, part of the reason that Windows Phone didn't work out well was because Microsoft required you to pay for a license to put Windows Mobile on your device, right? When Android was free and open source, so you could do whatever you wanted with it for free. And that made all of the difference. The only company really making Windows phones was Nokia. And Nokia's also dead. But yeah, there's a reason that Android beat Windows Phone as the competitor to iOS. But there are other competitors. Sort of. Namely, did you know that there is Linux on mobile? Which, if you know Android, you probably did know that. Because Android is built off of the Linux kernel. Kind of. It's a custom version of the Linux kernel. But there's like actual Linux on mobile. You can just install it on some phones, and some phones come with it. I think there's a version of Ubuntu? Okay, so yeah, there are a few, okay, Wikipedia is listing mostly Android stuff, but, there are a few proper Linux distros for mobile. Pure OS. Chrome OS doesn't count, thank you. KaiOS. There's Ubuntu Touch. Postmarket OS. I'm not sure about Manjaro ARM. I assume that that's just for ARM devices and not really specifically phones. But yeah, there are some Linuxes for mobile, and it's not really a real option, unfortunately. I'd love for it to get there, but it's not something that's in big enough demand that a whole lot of people are going to be working on it. And the people who want it are the really down and dirty techies. Or weirdos like me who, for some reason, just like troubleshooting. Yeah. But where we're at right now with phones, we've kind of plateaued. Cell phones are overall pretty much always going to just be a slab of glass. That's all that they that's all that they are nowadays, and that's all they really need to be in terms of how a user interacts with it. But for the most part, since like 2010 or 2011, the phone has pretty much stayed the same. Like, this is a device from 2021 or 22. This is a device from 2010. These... one is bigger, definitely, but they are the same idea. Just a slab of plastic. And there are some companies that are trying to do interesting stuff. I know that we have seen some I know we've seen some modular smartphones where you can replace the battery or the internals or whatever, but those have kind of died out already. There are some foldables and some flip phones, but for the most part, phones have kind of been perfected and plateaued. There's not really anywhere to go unless you want some kind of weird gimmick that nobody is really working on anymore. Moral of the story is, phones need to stop getting thinner. I don't want a thin phone, I want a slightly thicker phone that has a way better battery. Please, for the love of all that is holy and good, make your phones thicker again. Consumers do not want super thin. We want something that will work. And if it has just slightly, like a millimeter or two more thickness in your pocket, that's fine. The battery will last like, I don't know, 3 hours longer, and that would be fantastic. Anyway, and this has been Coffee with Bann. Figured out why the coffee wasn't sweet. I forgot to stir it. Oops.